Okay. What I'm going to do in this presentation is cover four main points. Very briefly, why CSR? Number two, what is CSR? Three practical suggestions on what to do, and then some final remarks. Why I use CSR and sustainability. I use them these days interchangeably. We can discuss that if people object vigorously. But sustainability grew out of the environmental movement, and CSR out of the social movement. But I think today they pretty much converged. Practical solutions. Very hard to give you practical solutions because the area is relatively complex and it depends on the sector of activity, how large your company is, where your company is, and also whether you're also an institution, because these days I use CSR to apply to both companies and the non-private sector. The textbook itself has been kindly put together by Greenleaf, and it was based on the course that I gave at the University of Geneva over 7 years, where I founded and directed the CSR activities there, which are going on still today. And I myself am still teaching, but in a business school in Geneva, but very much less than I did before. I found that running a group of people, a research center, and teaching in CSR took rather a lot of time. The textbook itself that you'll get a copy of after this introduction was based on presentations given at the University of Geneva. So probably about 60 to 70% of the book I wrote myself, and the other 30 or 40% was written by experts in the field, and many of them you will have heard of. Let me continue. Let's start off this whole thing about, and dismiss this as CSR simply greenwash and PR. We're talking about Africa. Certainly in the world, CSR and sustainability are key concepts to just about any large company these days. Not so much governments, and in fact there are only 2 governments in the world, my knowledge, maybe 3, who've actually incorporated the CSR sustainability into their programs. Mauritius, Sweden, possibly Denmark, and also surprisingly India. So it's a very popular concept just because India is about 1/4 of the world's population. Is CSR simply greenwash and PR? Well, I'm sure all of you got your thoughts on that. I won't go into that in much detail because I want to get to the practical aspects of this presentation. And I already see I'm 5 minutes into the presentation. So I'm in Africa, and one of the things I did was a visit a medium-sized company, this one called Gombe, which was producing, you can see the bottom left, fencing wire and fencing, pretty much needed around these parts. The CEO in the middle of the 3 people in the picture, if you can see that, didn't want actually to say very much about his company. He was just getting on with the job. But he didn't want much publicity, but he allowed us to look at every aspect of the company, and we followed the stakeholder model that I'll describe later. But what was pretty interesting is that even a small, medium-sized company was doing quite a lot along the route of CSR sustainability, but not known for it. And even the CEO didn't want to talk very much about it because he was kind of proud of what he was doing, but he's actually, believe it or not, quite a modest guy, and he wanted to stay that way. I tried to give them some more publicity. But as you can see, that even though if you generalize across Africa about CSR and sustainability, it's very difficult to generalize across 40 countries and get it right. There are lots of things going on in Africa. Probably South Africa itself, centering on Johannesburg, has been the most active in Africa, and I'm sure many of you listening know this. It's also the home of Mervyn King, who was the past president of the Global Reporting Initiative and is now the president of the Integrated Reporting Council. And he and I worked together on a chapter in the book to bring us up to date with integrated reporting, where integrated reporting and CSR sustainability essentially been put together in a very neat way. Let me continue to the next slide. This slide I slipped it in because it's my main interest right now. Is that I got worried over all the issues and problems in the world. I won't go into great detail. I might list them later. And I wondered whether CSR was actually applying to the big issues: immigration, terrorism, income distribution, employment, robotics, and so on. And this is actually a video, and you can click on that when you get the slides. And I assume we'll send you the slides, and then you can have a look at some of those issues. And I think yes, CSR can apply to some of the bigger issues. But let me remain on this presentation talking about practical applications and move to the next slide. Why CSR? Well, Neil has promised me a drink in a pub for a couple of years. So, Neil, looking at that picture, I think we better be quick. Pollution in the Pacific, the issue of Lehman Brothers, essentially a governance issue which led to their collapse, and also poor application of CSR issues. I had spoken to them 2007 about using a multi-stakeholder model, and they weren't really interested. All they wanted to focus on was philanthropy. I'm not saying that if they'd listened to me, they wouldn't have collapsed. Well, maybe they wouldn't have. Fukushima, you remember the disaster in Japan? Fukushima actually followed the rule book on CSR sustainability, and even mentioned GRI in some of their work. GRI, Global Reporting Initiative. I'm sure many of you know about that. But what was interesting in that whole Fukushima reporting episode is that one word they never mentioned, because again they didn't take a multi-stakeholder approach, was they missed out the word tsunami. And they built this nuclear power station in the most earthquake-prone region of the world. So again, I think CSR sustainability would have helped to avoid quite a lot of that. Again, one can never know. I've always been irritated about environmentalists who worry so much about the future. Not that I'm against worrying about the future, and I was an early member of the World Future Society in the UK. But sometimes one worries too much about the future without worrying about the present catastrophe. And this is going on as I speak, and as you so kindly listen to me without interrupting, actually, which is nice. This is a photo I actually took on the border between South Africa and Zimbabwe. Can CSR help here? And yes, and I'll get into that a little bit later, perhaps more in answer to your questions. The present catastrophe, which is also going on as I speak. And I don't know about you, but I often wake up in the morning with a sinking feeling about all these people. Why I'm in Kenya, by the way, is I work. My wife is from Somalia, and I work on Somalia actually as an economist, more than a CSR specialist, although they do need a lot of CSR, because Somalia is one of the countries which has a push factor that people want to leave to get better lives. And in Kenya, where I am, there's a big refugee camp called the Dadaab camp, which the Kenyan government, as I speak, is trying to close. Some people have been there for 29 years. A lot of people were born there. This is total madness, and it shows some lack of social responsibility of the Kenyan government. So yes, CSR can apply to the bigger issues, which was the earlier slide that I mentioned, and these are some of the ones that we've been looking at. In Somalia, I've actually been working on their development plan, but I've been working on just about every aspect of those issues there. So far, I've been working with international organizations such as the World Bank and IMF, but not with any companies actually. There's not a big company at all who's involved in any of this, except perhaps one or two who are interested in oil exploration. So what is CSR? Already you've seen very quickly, and you certainly know this debate, that CSR essentially is a multi-stakeholder approach, which doesn't just focus on shareholder value and creating profits. There's nothing, of course, wrong with creating profits. Without profits, companies can't exist. But the question is what they do with them and how they make their profits. The definition I have is this one. Let me leave it with you, and I'll take a drink of water and have a quick look through. So this definition is one I've been using for 15 years, and it's based on the academic literature of the 70s and 80s and 90s, most notably Donna Wood. A lot of my work is based on her, and also, of course, Ed Freeman, some of the academic work that's been done. Of course, all these issues have been expanded greatly in the last half a dozen years. If you're still with me, you might notice number 6, I've actually added to my definition the issue of big issues. CSR is not the same as philanthropy. I've been saying this for quite a long time, but certainly in Africa, most companies who are involved in some way in CSR sustainability do see it as philanthropy. The reason I say I don't want CSR just to be philanthropy, before I would say CSR should not be philanthropy, but I can see that philanthropy does help companies to start thinking about their own operations and how it links to the wider world. So I'm less critical of philanthropy today. I note that in Mauritius and in India, they both have taxes on the profits of large corporations of 2%. Mauritius has just reduced that to 1%, and that money is allocated in Mauritius to NGOs and philanthropic projects. In India, who actually copied Mauritius, India are actually using it to promote corporate social responsibility in large companies, and I think it's having quite an interesting impact. Sweden and Denmark are even further down the road, not in terms of taxing, because I've never seen CSR as a tax or as a cost, but as an adequate return on investment. My brief, I gave it a long definition just a few slides ago. My brief definition is this, that CSR is treating key stakeholders responsibly. So that's a good place to start if you want to get, or even to examine your own company or institution, to see how far down the route of becoming a socially responsible enterprise or institution you've become. By breaking down treating key stakeholders responsibly. So every word is loaded. And in the book, we go through, or I go through in some detail, what do you mean by treating, how do you go about it, how do you choose key stakeholders, a big aspect of that these days is the word materiality, who are the stakeholders, how do you engage with them, so how do you treat them, and responsibly, what do you mean by responsibly? So what do you mean by the ethical treatment of stakeholders? And again, in the book, we go into that in some detail. And as many of you know, there's a big literature on each of these four aspects that I put forward. So this is the kind of the key of corporate social responsibility, treating key stakeholders responsibly. I'll continue. Practical suggestions on what to do. I've come up with something called the CSR model, and after a seminar I gave last year, somebody said it's much better to brand it in terms of a name rather than just an abstract concept, so that's why the name Hopkins is associated with it. And essentially this model all comes from that definition I showed you just before, this one, which is, first of all, let's define it. It's amazing how many company reports or institutions don't define what they're doing. Wonder they get damn lost. Even the Global Reporting Initiative is pretty poor on definitions. From the definition, what are the key things to do? What are the principles that you wish to impart? What are the processes you wish to do in order to become a responsible entity? And what are, I call them products. In fact, Donald Wood, in the original formulation of this, called them outputs. I just wanted to call this PPP, the 3P model. So products are essentially, what are the outputs? What is the impact of all that you've done? And of course, we have to measure all this. The Global Reporting Initiative is a good basis to obtain indicators, and they're freely available on their website. Many of us, including my own company, are certified auditors under the Global Reporting Initiative. But my worry always with GRI is there are just so many indicators. You'll see in the book my thoughts on that and what to do about it. And finally, all this funnels into your CSR strategy, which you're going to present to the world and make your company or institution a much better place. CSR, again, is a systems approach. I haven't said that so far today. At looking at a company, I see now I've been going for 20 minutes and got a few minutes left to just go through a few more slides. This is something I took from Mauritius, which is their stock exchange, which is trying to make get all the companies at the stock exchange in Mauritius to be sustainable, and they've come up with a process, as you can see here. And the second column is probably the key of it, which is a sustainability questionnaire. And there is an overall view of methodology which they've used called the sustainability questionnaire. Now, I wasn't behind this questionnaire because you might notice, if you're very alert, the final column is social, and 4 down is corporate social responsibility. So they obviously don't agree that CSR is equal to sustainability. But anyway, this gives you the sort of things in the process that they're going through and the key areas that they think are important. And this links pretty much, as it says at the top, with the Global Reporting Initiative guidelines. This is the sort of thing that you might do if you do a stakeholder analysis of your own entity. I'm sure many of you listening have done this already, which is who are our key stakeholders and what are we doing with them. This is essential, and every day something crops up where these sorts of things are quite important. I just had a discussion with Nestle, believe it or not, on something that happened to me in the summer with them. And because of their social responsibility, I'm quite pleased to announce that they did an investigation into something and acted in a highly socially responsible manner because of their focus on shared value, especially communities and their customers. And they actually listened to little old me. I was quite pleased about that. Again, I can give you more details later. CSR on big issues, what next? Certainly board-level discussion on what can be done. Each government should ask for input from large companies, as is being done in India. CSR sustainability should be extended to cover big issues, and also to evaluate the long-term impact of big issues on companies, and decide budget and next steps. So this is a bit in addition to my Hopkins CSR model before, but let me just come to the end of this presentation and say, finally, more regulation. Again, this is worth a digression. We do have a chapter in the book on that. This sign, by the way, is just outside the World Bank in Washington, D.C. I took a few years ago. Totally incomprehensible. It's an example of regulation gone mad. I used to say no regulation for CSR sustainability, but I think, especially in Africa, that without regulation, companies probably won't do very much. So the law needs to push them along that frontier, so that they, and regulation should be to care and not to confuse. From the margins to the mainstream, is CSR becoming an increasingly part of your business strategy? Well, these are 3 continents. I couldn't get the same graph for Africa. If you're very alert at looking, the red shows that yes, it is becoming an increasingly part of your business strategies. This came from Ethical Cooperation based on GlobeScan, which actually I'm an advisor to the GlobeScan. I'm sure some of you are listening as well. And you can see that Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America are all pretty active in CSR. If you looked at Africa, probably the red would be probably 25% of the way around. Can CSR be applied to non-profits? Well, I said yes. And NGOs, indeed, have often been criticized of holding up private companies to high standards, but not themselves. And the methodology that we developed, and I outlined briefly, can be applied to NGOs. Public administrations too, similar argument. Big issues, okay, probably getting bored because I've said too much about that. My final definition, CSR is treating key stakeholders responsibly. A few of the books that I've meandered through over the last 10 or 15 years, the one on the right is the latest one. This picture was taken last year. I'm an advisor to European Football Association. You can see when I advise the European Football Association, I get quite a lot of people at my workshops. Back to you, Neil. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. That was really interesting. Next, probably today's event will be a Q&A session. So I've got some questions here for Michael, which I'm sure will be as entertaining and insightful as ever in answering. But before I do that, I will just remind people that the book will be sent out after the event. If you're interested too, we will be sending a link to our website, which will have today's event on there, so you can watch again. And if anybody would like the slides for today's event, please let me know, and I will send those through too. Okay, Michael. Okay, so we'll start with the questions. The first question I've got here is, if I'm reading this right, what is the role of foreign aid with regard CSR in Africa? Is it a positive or a negative thing, or how do you see that?
Wow. Huge question. I think probably like a lot of people working in Africa, we have a love-hate relationship with foreign aid. Quite often, foreign aid comes along with a lot of baggage, asking countries or institutions to behave in certain ways, and this is conditional in the ways that they work. Now that's very abstract, But I know, for example, as I'm working with the World Bank, that the World Bank and the IMF have a particular way of looking at economies, and dating from the Chicago School of Economics, and their aid is very much linked to that, including debt relief and everything else. And I think that hampers development quite a lot. Now, that's some agencies. Other agencies, and the UK is well, it also suffers criticism from my previous comment, but generally I know they think very, very hard about how their aid does have impact. And I'm pretty frightened that under Brexit that there will be a reduction in aid from Britain, and I think that will hurt everybody. A lot of British aid goes into helping small businesses, and they know quite a lot about how that works. Even more goes into helping refugees, which is absolutely critical and crucial today. Without foreign aid, just about nobody would be helping refugees, and to a certain extent reducing migrants, the numbers of migrants chasing up to North Africa and crossing the sea over to Greece or Italy or wherever. So yes, foreign aid, there are mixed feelings about it. And when I'm thinking foreign aid, I'm thinking at the top of my head Western foreign aid, and I know that's often criticized even by my colleagues in Somalia, who much prefer to go along to China or the Arab Emirates, where the conditions are much less. Whether that's a good thing or not, sometimes is and sometimes not, because it can lead to massive levels of corruption. Pretty long reply, and I don't think I got even near to addressing the questioner's concerns, but maybe she or he would like to come up with a rider.
No. Okay, thank you, Michael. Next question is from Ursula, and she asks, can impact investing support a move in the right direction?
Yeah, by impact investing, I've always been curious with the term impact. This is used to be called, I don't know if it still is, socially responsible investing. We have a chapter of that in the book. Clearly, investors want two things. They want to have that their investment helps in some way. I'm not too sure this would mean that they would accept lower returns from that. And the second thing is where I think the word impact comes in, is how well is their investment doing, both in terms of rate of return on their investment and also in terms of the impact on society. I know it's a very fast growing field in terms of investment around the world. I don't have the figures in front of me for Africa, but as an investor myself, certainly I would be looking for, and I do look for, returns, as well as that my investment goes into socially responsible companies. And I guess I don't look too much at whether that investment then has an impact on, shall we say, the well-being of people involved in that company or around that company. I'm looking for the fact that I'm investing in a socially responsible company and that it's providing a decent return. So again, I probably haven't answered that question in the detail that it needs. But again, Ursula, if you want to come up with another question, do come up. Come back to me.
Well, I've got a question for you, Michael, and touching on something you mentioned earlier on. How would do you see a Trump victory next month affecting the African CSR sphere?
Disaster.
Would it make a difference?
Yeah, it'll be a disaster. Already, I was with last night the Secretary General of one of the biggest unions in Kenya, and he was appalled to see the adverts or the discussion yesterday about the National Health Service should aim only for British doctors. And he said, well, what does that mean, Michael? Somebody who's born in Britain or somebody with a British passport, and so on. What it means to me is that it's racist. And I felt very uncomfortable discussing that with the Secretary General. And I think that even Britain, which is, and I'm British, I was always proud of my country for being against racism and for welcoming immigrants from right across the world. All that, as you know, is stopping the institutes, the rage against foreigners. Incidents in London have increased 4 or 5 fold since Brexit. I'm not talking Trump, as you asked. So all these undercurrents are hurting thinking people in Africa, and also thinking people across the world. And I was reading analysis from The Guardian, actually, that my son sent me this morning, that the people who are voting for Trump tend to be white and tend not to have college degrees. And very similar to what happened to Brexit. The people who voted for Brexit had lower levels of education on average than people who voted for. And I think that article was quite interesting. So a Trump victory would lead to increase in terms of racism, increasing isolation. Take the case that happened here yesterday with a colleague of mine who's working for the Ministry of Finance in Somalia. He's also Swedish nationality. He's just had a young baby who's now a few months old. Highly educated, well informed, and was going to the World Bank IMF meetings in Washington, D.C. He came to Nairobi to get a visa, and so far it's been refused because he's a Somali. This sort of thing is going to increase under Trump. What can I say to him? I fail, because in some ways I represent Westerners and Western thinking, and I just feel totally angry and ill at ease at this. So I know Neil, having seen some of my previous videos on this, know what I think about Trump. I absolutely am horrified with what's going on. And also, I'm just talking about one thing, the implicit racism in what he's saying. In fact, not even implicit, it's explicit. So a Trump victory, I think, would take the world back a long, long way away. And I don't know if probably none of you are as crazy as I was who got up at 3 this morning and listened to the Vice President debates. There, we were talking about nuclear weapons, and that Trump is quite happy to allow people to get nuclear weapons because he said, well, we Americans, we can deal with that. And people are just absolutely aghast in the chat shows this morning. So there are just so many things that will happen under this guy, Trump, that is incredibly worrying. And even more worrying is that if Trump doesn't get in, what's happening, the movement in the US has gone to this kind of non-thinking majority, which even in Britain, I think there was one of the ministers, was it Gove, who said that people in Britain who are voting for Leave don't want to listen to experts anymore. Now, all of the people here, I'm sure, don't belong in the non-expert arena, and all of you are thinking people, and must be appalled by a statement like that. For instance, does gold mean that, and Trump mean that when you go to a hospital for surgery, that it should be done by a non-expert, local postman, for instance? Anyway, I can continue for a long time. Neil,
thank you, Michael. I think the phrase that Guy used was so-called experts, which also has another sinister implication. But hey, possibly we've just had quite a gloomy analysis there, if you don't mind me saying. However, I'd like to, and this will be the last question, Michael, leave us on a positive note with obviously special reference to Africa. Have we reason to be hopeful? And if we do, what is the reason?
We are, I think, in Africa pretty much at a turning point. I think that perhaps the best indicator in the end of almost everything is life expectancy at birth. Life expectancy if life expectancy is increasing and is high, that means your country's doing pretty much the right things. And life expectancy right through Africa, with a few exceptions, is increasing. So the fight against poverty, which has been working, the fight against diseases, we can thank the Gates Foundation doing lots of work on malaria, has been helping, and the impact has been huge. So life expectancy is increasing rapidly across Africa. So that's the good news. The bad news is that it does seem to be associated with corruption. And what does corruption mean? Corruption is everywhere. From one can't trust a policeman because if you're stopped in your car, I don't drive here actually, but if you're stopped in your car, 9 times out of 10 it's for the policeman to get a bribe off you. So if anybody has a problem, the last person they call to help them is a policeman because of corruption. And unfortunately that's endemic, and it seems to be right across Africa with a few exceptions, a few beacons: Mauritius, Botswana, and to a certain extent Tunisia, that's in the Maghreb, sometimes they're not part of Africa, Rwanda. So there are some hopeful signs against corruption, but it's a long struggle. Sorry not to be too positive, Neil.
Okay, but thanks for that. Okay, Michael, thanks for your time. That was the last question. Just to reiterate what I was saying earlier, that the book, the slides, and any other information regarding today's webinar will be sent out soon, by the end of the day, I believe. And with that, again, I'll thank Michael for his time, thought-provoking and entertaining, obviously, as usual. And so that's all from us, so thank you.
Thanks so much, Neil, and goodbye, everybody. I hope you see you around the world at some point, somewhere.